The first scream I heard was blood-curdling, like someone had just seen a monster. In that moment, I knew two things for certain. First, Karen Mitchell's HOA-sanctioned beach party had officially gone off the rails, and second, my legal alligators were having a busier day than I was. Freeze frame. Yeah, that's me. You're probably wondering how we got here. Let me rewind for a second. When I first bought the land by Blackthorn Lake, it was the kind of place you only stumble upon by accident, like some well-kept secret only the patient few could uncover. There were no signs, no paved roads, no rows of generic houses lined up in a neat little suburban parade. Just raw land, towering pines, and the gentle lapping of the lake against jagged rocks, like the place had been waiting for me to arrive. I built my cabin with my own two hands, using tools that were more stubborn than skilled. It wasn't pretty, not at first, but it was mine. It took months of hard work, hammering nails into the wood, shaping every beam of timber with nothing more than determination. And as I sat back and looked at the cabin finally standing among the trees, I knew one thing for sure. This was a place that belonged to me, and I belonged to it. There wasn't a neighbor within half a mile, just the deer that came down to the water at dusk, the turtles sunning themselves on the rocks, and the occasional heron that flew overhead like an arrow drifting in slow motion. Blackthorn Lake wasn't some polished tourist attraction, either. It was muddy in places, rocky in others, deep enough that if you lost a body in it, no one would find it for 100 years. In short, it was perfect. Or at least it was. Until the HOA showed up like a swarm of locusts, clad in fake pearls and clip-on name tags. The first sign that something was off came one morning when I found a brand new sign hammered into the ground near the main road. Welcome to Blackthorn Shores Community, a deed-restricted neighborhood. I stared at that sign for a long time, coffee cooling in my hand, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't sold anything. I hadn't signed anything. But while I'd been minding my own business, someone had bought up a few of the old hunting cabins down the road, bulldozed them, and built fancy lakeside homes. And with those homes came the HOA, led by none other than Karen Mitchell, a woman whose voice could strip paint off a wall, and whose smile was as real as a plastic Christmas tree in July. At first, they kept to themselves, mostly. I'd get these glossy HOA newsletters full of cheerful lies about community spirit, newsletters printed on thick, overpriced paper that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. Then came the invitations to neighborhood mixers, lakeside socials, all held suspiciously close to the water's edge, on land that technically wasn't theirs. I ignored them. Figured they'd get tired of trying to civilize a place that had been wild since before their great-grandparents were born. But Karen was the type of person who took disinterest as a challenge, and she wasn't about to back down. If anything, it seemed to fuel her. The first community event took place on a Saturday afternoon, just as the summer heat was turning the air into a shimmering haze. I watched from my porch as SUVs and minivans clogged up the narrow gravel road, engines wheezing in protest. Folding tables popped up along the lake's edge like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Loudspeakers blared sugary country music across the water, drowning out the peaceful calls of the loons nesting in the reeds. Grown adults, all wearing matching t-shirts, trampled through the wild grasses, stringing up banners and balloons. I walked down to the edge of my property, arms crossed, standing there like a statue, as Karen herself minced over in wedge sandals that were completely unsuited for the muddy terrain. "Isn't this wonderful?" she chirped, throwing her arms wide like some deranged game show host. "We're bringing the community together." I glanced at the battered private property sign nailed to an old oak tree and said as politely as I could manage, "You're on my land." Karen just laughed, the kind of laugh that made my blood boil. "Oh, pish-posh. It's just a little lakeside fun. Besides, the community owns the water, right?" I opened my mouth to correct her, to explain that not only did I own the land up to the high water mark, but I also had sole rights to any access paths that crossed it. But she was already turning away, issuing orders to her army of suburban invaders. I let the first event slide. Maybe it wasn't worth the fight. Maybe they'd get it out of their system. Maybe the mosquitoes and the smell of wet, rotting algae would remind them that Blackthorn Lake wasn't the kind of place you could tame with a bounce house and lemonade stand. But Karen wasn't the type to be deterred by a little thing like common sense. She saw a quiet guy like me as nothing more than an empty canvas, an opportunity to paint over with her own tacky, misguided dreams. The next event came 2 weeks later, and this time, it was bigger, louder, more obnoxious. They brought jet skis this time, buzzing around like angry hornets, scaring off the nesting birds, sending waves crashing against the delicate reeds along the shore. Beer cans floated in the shallows by nightfall. Someone set off fireworks that showered sparks over the dry pines, and I spent half the night with a hose in hand, dousing embers before they could turn the forest into a funeral pyre. By the time the third event rolled around, billed as the Blackthorn Summer Bash, with glittery letters on a banner stretched between two crooked saplings, it was clear Karen wasn't just hosting parties. She was staking a claim. They set up tiki bars, hauled in generators that rumbled and stank of diesel, and even tried to lay down sand to create a beach area along the rocky shoreline, bulldozing centuries-old stones into a sad, lumpy imitation of a Florida resort. I caught two teenagers trying to spray paint one of my trees with the HOA logo. When I confronted them, they just laughed and ran back to the crowd, where Karen clapped them on the shoulders like they were heroes. That was when I knew it was time to act. I decided enough was enough. I couldn't just stand by and let Karen and her HOA tear apart my sanctuary, so I put on my cleanest flannel shirt, tucked my hair behind my ears, and showed up at the next HOA meeting. If I was going to fight, I was going to fight on their turf, inside their fake, air-conditioned world. The room smelled like stale pine and desperation, the kind of place where everything is too perfect to be real. Karen was sitting at the front, flanked by her loyalists, a group of middle-aged warriors armed with clipboards and fake smiles, their passive-aggressive nods ready to attack anyone who questioned their authority. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, letting the chair scrape loudly against the tile. All eyes turned to me. The silence was thick, the tension palpable. I laid out the facts in a voice so calm it could cut glass. "The lakefront is my private property," I said. "Your events are unauthorized trespassing. Any further use of my land will result in legal action." For a moment, the room was dead silent. I could almost hear the sound of everyone holding their breath. Then, Karen laughed. A high, brittle sound that echoed off the walls, the kind of laugh that made you feel like you were being mocked, but not directly. "Oh, come now, Mr. Lancaster," she said, flipping through her notes with theatrical exaggeration. "Surely you don't mind a little harmless fun. You're not paranoid, are you?" A ripple of laughter ran through the room, followed by her next words, dripping with sarcasm. "The kind that bites. After all, the lake belongs to all of us in spirit, doesn't it?" I didn't respond. I just stood there, gathering my papers, tipping my hat in mock courtesy, and walked out into the night. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Karen hadn't just underestimated me. She had awakened something deep within me, a fire that had been smoldering for years, waiting for the right moment to ignite. The next morning, I began my preparation. I had spent years getting to know Blackthorn Lake, not just the surface, but every little secret it kept beneath its calm exterior. And when I thought about it, the more I realized that the lake had something more to offer than just its beauty. It had power, an untapped, hidden strength. So I went to work, preparing a plan that would turn Karen's little summer bash into her greatest mistake. I started by making some calls, first to the county office, then to the fire marshal. I was determined to catch them off guard, use the very system they thought would protect them to expose their lies. But as usual, nothing happened. The government's response was as predictable as it was frustrating. When I called about the violations, about the unapproved construction, the unsafe storage of fireworks, the lack of permits, everyone just shrugged. "We're reviewing it," they said, which was bureaucratic speak for, "We don't want to rock the boat." And that's when it hit me. The law wasn't going to save me. If I wanted to stop this, I had to take matters into my own hands. And so, I did what any sensible man would do in my situation. I created my own flyer, loud and obnoxious, just like Karen's. "Blackthorn Blowout." It screamed in thick, bubbly letters, complete with fireworks and a cartoon alligator wearing sunglasses. I knew this would grab attention. Beneath the garish title, Karen's name was printed in bold, like she was some kind of royalty. It promised free beer, jet ski races, fireworks, and the usual circus they'd tried to create before. The flyer screamed with the same brazen audacity that Karen had used when she first thought she could claim the lake as her own. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't just throwing another event. I was setting the trap. I had it all planned out. I was going to let Karen dig herself deeper into the hole she'd already started, let her inflate her little beach party into something even bigger, and then, when the time was right, I would reveal the truth. That Blackthorn Lake was my sanctuary, and that no one, not even the HOA, was going to take that away from me. And that's when the changes started. The day after the flyers hit mailboxes, I saw a crew of men show up with ATVs and began hauling in equipment, portable bars, folding stages, sand, and even fences to cordon off party zones. The whole thing was a massive construction site now, a strange blend of neon vests, plywood, and cheap plastic decor, with no regard for the environment they were destroying. When I confronted one of them, I asked who had given them permission to set up here. He just gave me a greasy grin and said, "Karen said it's all good, man," and went right back to unloading. I tried calling the county again, but this time, all I got was a lazy shrug. Karen has self-certified everything, so it should be fine. Self-certified, like a fox auditing the henhouse. I was furious, but I knew the wheels were already in motion. It wasn't just a beach party anymore. This was a full-scale invasion. Then came the signs. They started popping up along the gravel road like a bad joke, parking for the beach party ahead. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They'd set up makeshift toll booths, waving cars through like it was some kind of carnival. I called the fire marshal, thinking he might take it seriously. Instead, he told me the same thing. The paperwork was filed, it was all self-certified, and there was nothing more they could do. The law was failing me, and the truth was, there was no one left to stop Karen. I knew it was time to fight fire with fire. I had no other choice but to let the whole thing play out. Let them believe they were untouchable. They didn't know I had already prepared for something much bigger than just a bunch of loudspeakers and cheap beer. The day of the Blackthorn blowout arrived, and everything was set in motion. I watched from my porch as the chaos unfolded. The music was blaring from giant rented speakers, a terrible mix of pop country and club beats that rattled the bones of the earth itself. Glow sticks cracked and snapped to life in the hands of beer-soaked partygoers. Jet skis screamed across the lake, carving deep, angry scars into the once quiet water. It was everything I had imagined it would be, and more. But what they didn't know was that I had been waiting for this. Every step, every noise, every ounce of destruction, they were all part of the plan. I watched as a couple of drunk kids stumbled down to the water, kicking off their sneakers and charging into the shallows with all the grace of bowling balls thrown downhill. They were hooting and hollering, completely oblivious to what was lurking just beneath the surface. And that's when it happened. The alligators, my alligators, started moving. I'd seen it before. The way they lurked, silent as death, beneath the waterline. You could only spot them by the faint ripple on the surface, the way the reeds shifted where they shouldn't be moving. It was subtle, but once you knew what to look for, you could spot them in an instant. The first scream cut through the night like a blade. A shrill, terrified scream that froze the party dead in its tracks. For a split second, the DJ, a poor high schooler Karen had probably paid under the table, hesitated. His finger hovered over the turntables, unsure whether to keep the music going or to stop and acknowledge what was happening. But then the second scream came, and then the third, and that was when panic spread like wildfire. The crowd gathered around the water's edge, their drunken minds failing to process what was happening. Flashlights and cell phones bobbed across the lake, their beams jerking wildly, casting chaotic shadows across the water. The two drunk kids were flailing, struggling to run through waist-deep water, screaming about something with teeth. One of them fell, disappearing under the water for a horrifying second, before scrambling back up, eyes wide in terror. One girl in a bright orange bikini stood in the shallows up to her knees, her body frozen in panic, before she shrieked and hopped backward, blood trailing down her shin. One of the younger gators had nipped her, but it wasn't malicious, just curiosity, a sharp, innocent bite. It didn't matter. Chaos erupted. People ran in every direction, some screamed, others laughed, still thinking it was some kind of sick joke, but Karen, ever the hostess, tried to restore order with her megaphone. She clapped her hands, shouting commands no one cared to listen to. The lake, however, wasn't interested in being tamed. It wasn't interested in the fireworks, the jet skis, or Karen's delusions of grandeur. The lake, and the creatures it held had their own rules. Then, finally, someone had the sense to call 911. The sound of sirens split the air, louder than any coyote's howl, as emergency vehicles screeched to a halt. First came the sheriff's deputies, followed by wildlife officers hauling airboats and emergency equipment. The news vans arrived next, their logos glowing in the floodlights as they rolled in, cameras already set to capture every chaotic second. From my porch, I sat there in silence, sipping my black coffee, the taste bitter and beautiful. It was everything I had hoped for, the inevitable unraveling of Karen's masterpiece. The deputies waded into the mess, shouting commands no one would heed. The wildlife officers jumped into action, throwing ropes and pulling frantic swimmers to safety. Flashbulbs from the news crew exploded like fireworks, lighting up the scene in stuttering, blinding bursts. Reporters hovered like vultures, eager to capture every detail of the train wreck unfolding before them. At first, the narrative was still one of fun gone wrong. A drunken beach party turned into an accident. But soon, the words unpermitted event and unsafe conditions began to appear. And then, like a dark cloud, trespassing on a registered wildlife sanctuary entered the conversation. The word lawsuit floated through the air, hanging there, thick and foul, like the stench of something rotting. I watched Karen as she tried to manage the chaos, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her glittery hostess sash half ripped from her body. She kept shouting about how she had permits, how it was community land, how none of this was her fault. But no one was listening. Not the crowd, not the police, not the reporters. They had all turned on her. The tide had shifted, and there was no way to stop it now. A wildlife officer approached Karen, notebook in hand. I couldn't hear the conversation from where I sat, but I saw the moment she realized the gravity of her situation. Her face twisted with fear, anger, and confusion, all warring for control. She looked around for allies, for anyone who might back her up. But the crowd that had cheered for her just hours ago now stood in judgment, waiting for her to crumble. And crumble she did. By midnight, the last injured partygoer had been loaded into an ambulance, and the last generator had sputtered out. A weary officer trudged up to my porch, soaked from head to toe, his boots leaving muddy prints across the boards. "Mr. Lancaster," he said, tipping his hat in weary respect. "You're the registered steward of Blackthorn Lake, correct?" I nodded slowly. "That's correct, officer." He smiled grimly. "Thought so. You're not in any trouble. In fact, we're probably going to need your help sorting out whatever the hell all this is." I just sipped my coffee, savoring the bitter, beautiful taste of karma, brewed slow and strong. The next morning, the aftermath began to unfold. The sheriff's cruisers rolled along the shore, deputies fanning out to take statements. Wildlife officers gathered around confiscated fireworks and collapsed beer tents, their faces grim. A tattered Blackthorn blowout banner hung from a tree, half ripped, snapping in the wind like a flag over a conquered city. Karen's empire had crumbled, and the only thing left was wreckage, regret, and the quiet stare of the lake, untouched, undefeated, waiting to reclaim what was rightfully hers. By noon, the first lawsuit hit. The state environmental agency had filed a formal complaint against Blackthorn Shores HOA for unlawfully disturbing a protected wildlife sanctuary. That alone carried a potential six-figure fine, along with mandatory restoration requirements. An hour later, the county fire marshal followed suit with multiple counts of unsafe storage and handling of explosives, no permits filed, and illegal fireworks within a restricted fire zone. But the real carnage came in the form of personal injury claims. By the end of the day, 6 lawsuits had been filed by partygoers who had been bitten, scratched, or scared senseless by the alligators. Most of them alleged gross negligence and reckless endangerment, and every one of those lawsuits had Karen Mitchell's name on it. 3 months later, Blackthorn Shores HOA was no more. The organization was bankrupt, dissolved, and sold off in pieces. Karen's house, the 2-story monstrosity she'd so proudly flaunted, was seized by the bank and put on the market, where it sat empty and unloved for months. Rumor had it she packed up her SUV in the dead of night and fled to a distant city, where no one knew her name and no one cared about HOA drama. As for me, I took a few weeks to let the silence return. I watched as wildlife came back to Blackthorn Lake, the frogs singing once more at night, And then, on a crisp fall morning, I went to work on something I had been planning ever since the lawsuits started rolling in. It took a day of digging, a few bags of cement, and a lot of stubborn satisfaction. But by sunset, it stood proudly at the entrance to the old gravel road, a brand new sign, carved into heavy oak, sealed against the weather. In bold, hand-painted letters, it read, Lake Gators Refuge. No trespassing. Seriously. Below that, a smaller plaque read, in memory of Blackthorn Lake's original guardians, the ones with teeth. Sometimes, when the evening mist curls low over the water and the crickets fall silent for just a heartbeat, I sit on my porch, drink in hand, and listen to the quiet hum of a place finally at peace. So what do you think? Was Karen justified in trying to improve the community, or did she get exactly what was coming to her? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And hey, if you've ever had an HOA clash or a similar experience, share your story. Let's talk about the lessons learned before the alligators come for us all.